Merch, we have a new shirt and it's super discounted already, plus another 15% off using code UE15%. So there's a link down below in the description. Two things right off the bat. One, because of the current shutdown, I've been unable to get certain critical components of my new PC layout, which meant I was operating on a one-screen setup and thus could not effectively stream Doom Eternal from PC. This caused me to play on console because I don't know how long before I can actually safely go out and get cord adapters or have them reliably shipped to me, and if that makes you upset, I don't know what to tell you, it is what it is. Second thing, I am not in love with Doom Eternal at all. It's got some great aspects, certainly more good than bad, and at the end of this video, I will genuinely recommend it for a certain demographic of gamers. Spoiler, I liked it enough to do that, and I'll explain thoroughly why in just a minute, but I will not just be sucking this game's dick like I've seen so many other people doing over the past few days. It has some major flaws. It's honestly difficult for me to pick a real starting point. Despite the fact it's an extremely linear game in and of itself, describing it with a clean progression from start to finish covering all aspects feels like a nearly insurmountable task. The most logical place to start is narrative. There really isn't much to say about narrative other than I liked it, and that's worth noting when I find myself getting bored of most narrative games that I play. I will deliberately avoid spoilers at all costs here, but suffice it to say the narrative was interesting, well thought out, and best of all contained an actual arc of goals and accomplishments. It's incredibly hard to say with any degree of certainty whether or not a subjective story will be appealing to other players. For instance, some people think Lord of the Rings is a bad story. That's not to compare Doom to Lord of the Rings, it's not even close to that caliber at all, but as far as video games go, I wasn't rolling my eyes, and that's saying something nowadays. On top of a competent story is a world-class soundtrack. I say those words, world-class, with absolute sincerity here. Doom Eternal has an undeniably brilliant soundtrack, and much like narrative, but to an even greater extreme, soundtrack rarely impacts my enjoyment of a title. If the score is competent, that's plenty enough for me. If it isn't a flat-out detriment, it can usually just be relegated to the background and left out of the spotlight. But the soundtrack for Doom Eternal demands the spotlight. I won't spend too long harping on it, but the ebb and flow of the music, punctuating the brutal, gory combat, is without a doubt some of the best integrated sound design I have heard in a game for years. Many years. It won't be everyone's cup of tea. Anyone who prefers meditation music or the soothing sound of waves on a beach might be thrown off a bit by the visceral tracks, but then again, Doom was never a game franchise for those who prefer mellow and easygoing themes. So narrative and sound design, good and great, but now it's time for gameplay and progression. This is where I will not just be singing praise for the title, because the truth is, despite a fantastic loop of basic combat, there are horribly designed aspects that destroy the pacing and ruin the overall flow of what is otherwise probably one of the best shooters to come out in many years. The basic loop is actually pretty simple. Bounce from demon to demon, ripping their heads off or eviscerating them with cinematic glory kills to regain health, or disemboweling them with your chainsaw for ammo. This works really well in the early stages of the game. As you progress, you are also unlocking various new weapons, some of which are ridiculously overpowered in the best possible way, but the further you go, the longer the individual rooms get, the more larger demons come out, and the harder it gets to enjoy the actual intended gameplay loop without points of severe tedium. I'll try to summarize it as best I can, and anyone who plays for more than probably 6 or 8 hours will unfortunately figure out exactly what I mean here. Because your ammo recharge is tied directly to chainsaw kills, and for some reason ammo pickups on the ground, especially in heavy combat rooms, are less than plentiful, you will need to be conserving chainsaw fuel for the right moments. However, because of how annoyingly long some of these fights are, especially when you get to the point where marauders show up, but that's a whole separate topic I'll get to in a minute, you are going through ammo faster than you can get it back. On top of this, your ammo reserves and carry capacity, without speccing heavily into certain upgrades, are extremely low. And finally, when you use your chainsaw ability on a larger enemy, it consumes multiple fuel points. The end result, all of this combined, is that you very often need to get chainsaw kills to have any ammunition at all for any gun. And if you are stuck with 2 or 3 large enemies to kill without enough fuel in the vicinity, it utterly and completely destroys the pacing of the game, as you dodge around trying to either grenade them to death over the span of several minutes or somehow find scraps of resources with which to fight. It doesn't happen every single time, but when it does happen, it totally destroys the experience. This might not be an issue if you could simply carry more ammunition. The strange thing is, oftentimes in corridor areas between segments, there will be like half a dozen shotgun pickups, for example, but you can't carry even close to that, so you pick up one ton of them, go into the next phase area, run out in 30 seconds, and are back to square one. Another exacerbating factor is wave-based combat. Pretty much all of your major encounters are just wave-based combat of the same enemies over and over in a single room. That's not to say that the combat isn't fun, because it is, and despite the fact there is a huge amount of enemy archetype repetition, they still feel just as good to glory kill as ever before. But the sheer number of waves, one after another, of the same enemies just spread out, gets horribly annoying. Here's an example. In one room, you might go up against 2 spider enemies, then 2 eyeball enemies, then 2 chargers, then 2 more spiders, then 2 more eyeballs. And by the end, you can't help but think, why didn't they just make it 3 waves instead of 5, where there are 4 spiders and 4 eyeballs just at the same time? So you can at least group them together and use the same rockets or sticky bombs or grenades to conserve ammo, and not literally fight the same enemies in the same room just 5 minutes apart. Another good example would be the introduction of a specific new enemy archetype in the campaign. The game sets this battle up really well, and then when it happens, it's very fun. On Ultra Nightmare, which is what I was playing on, it is also very challenging. And then 5 seconds later, they are like, oh surprise, haha, now fight 2 of the exact same enemy. It's not fun, it's not creative, it's kind of lazy and obnoxious. The thing that really pushed me over the edge, though, were Marauders. Marauders are an elite enemy that is just awful, and I mean really, truly awful. At first, when you fight one as if it's a main boss, it's challenging and very fun, actually, but then they start showing up at the end of multi-wave rooms. Keep in mind, ammo trouble is a very real thing at this point. These Marauders either throw shockwaves at you from range, shoot you with a shotgun up close, or swing at you with an axe while at mid-range. The horrible part is that they also have a completely invulnerable red shield that they can pull out in a split second whenever they want, which effectively makes you waste what little ammo you have left, especially at the tail end of a multi-wave encounter, and if you die, you have to do the whole thing again. These Marauders are also insanely fast, deal a ton of damage, and have a boatload of health. All of it combines to make an encounter that just sucks. I know some contrarian edgelords in the comment section will be like, well, you just need to do this and that and the other thing and blah blah, get good scrub. Well, sure, whatever. But for the average player tackling this game, especially on ultra violence difficulty, these Marauders can just totally kill your pacing, your enjoyment, and your overall experience. I found myself just rolling my eyes and wanting to quit when a Marauder would show up after like 5 previous waves of enemies. Keep in mind, these previous enemy waves were not easy. They were not impossible, but they were definitely not easy to do. And then this cheesy, ammo-wasting Marauder steps in, and I seriously could not think of anything I wanted to be doing less in the entire world than fighting that enemy archetype. This might not have mattered as much if half the game was not very simple wave-based combat just in the next room over and over. There is very little deviation from that formula, and the other half is platforming and puzzle mechanics to get to the next wave-based room. Now, oddly enough, contrary to what I've seen from a few other creators, I actually liked the platforming in a lot of instances. I never really found myself struggling to find the next area to jump to. It might take a little bit of time, but I always got there, and then it was reasonably difficult while not feeling impossible to do so. There is quite a bit of platforming, wall jumping, and timed air dashing to get from place to place, but at least for me, that wasn't really a low point. It certainly wasn't a high point for the game, but it felt very obvious that a good amount of work had been put into these mechanics. And when more often than not I felt myself just organically gravitating towards the right path forward, subconsciously, it became clear that there is some high quality design work under the surface which is making that happen. Now for progression. I am a sucker for progression and customization in almost any game that I play, and because of that I was excited at first when I saw the many systems in Doom Eternal. However, that excitement was short-lived. There are a number of different progression avenues, and each of them certainly does have powerful bonuses, but it just felt cluttered. It felt almost like complexity for the sake of complexity, subtracting from the value of actually finding any given secret or special unlock. There are weapon mods, and then weapon points, which further customize the mods. There are Praetor coins, which have a sort of strange wheel of upgrades for the environment, movement, and your grenades. Then there's runes, which unlock perks, or talents, whatever you want to call them. Then other runes, I don't even actually remember the names of those items off the top of my head, to be completely honest, but there's another set of unlockables that augment health, armor, and certain abilities when paired up. And then there is your fortress, which has various items and doors that get unlocked with batteries. All of these things can have a definite tangible impact on character power, but when so much of the core gameplay loop can be boiled down to getting glory kills to recharge health, especially on harder difficulties, you have to be doing this constantly, and chainsaw kills for ammo, of which you run out way too often, most of these perk upgrades and wheel upgrades and weapon mods really aren't going to help you. For instance, some guns kill enemies that you need for glory kills too quickly, or in a strange pattern where one shot won't always stagger them, but 2 shots will kill them outright. There seems to be an emphasis placed on weapon swapping for the right purpose. One weapon for weak points, another for destroying shields, etc, etc. They each have a unique individual use. And that is aided by a system of slowed down time in the weapon swap wheel, but that time slow takes an uncomfortably long duration to kick in, and on higher difficulties that can mean the difference between life and death. When you need to be switching weapons so often, whether for utility or just because you are constantly running out of ammo, which happens all the time, those small bits of time really do add up. Now, another thing worth talking about is how the pacing changes with different difficulties. I won't deny that the best satisfaction comes from a difficulty like Ultra Violence, which is what I mostly played on, but I also find it worth mentioning that when I eventually swapped to a lower difficulty, just to see how that felt and how the enemies would change, etc., it allowed me to play very differently. On harder difficulties, you are constantly dodging, non-stop. Dash, 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 glory kill one enemy as fast as you can to recharge, then dash, dash, dash again to avoid damage. The game sometimes becomes a long, drawn-out hide-and-seek encounter, picking off one enemy at a time, but never really going toe-to-toe with anything. Later on, that changes a bit and you start to kill much faster, but still this idea that you are always the one having to dodge and run never really goes away. However, on lower difficulties, when you can actually spend the time firing off more consecutive rockets or running through burning ground without worrying too much to blood punch a large enemy and destroy all of its armor, that is a distinctly different feeling. Better or worse, that's up to the individual, each individual gamer or player, but harder difficulties change quite a bit about how you approach the combat. Interspersed throughout the world are various secrets and collectibles. I myself did not go for a 100% completion run. I found a decent number of them certainly, but I was more focused on the combat and character progression. However, among these secrets and collectibles are the Slayer Gates, and Slayer Gates are definitely worth discussing. Slayer Gates are sometimes tricky to open, having to find their key with a jump puzzle or something like that, but once you do, it is a high-octane horde of enemies that will rival any other encounter in the game. At its core, it's yet another room of wave-based combat, but the ultimate reward from Slayer Gates will be a uniquely powerful weapon that feels worthy of the effort. However, being totally honest here, while the reward weapon is fun, it feels a bit strange that its counterpart, unlocked through normal campaign gameplay, is actually far more powerful, with faster clear speeds and easier far-reaching destruction. Alongside Slayer Gates and smaller insignificant collectibles, unless you are chasing all aspects of the lore, in which case you will probably enjoy them quite a bit, there are secret encounters. The secret encounters are very hit or miss. I found one that was super enjoyable, with exploding cue ball enemies and a horde of smaller imps to tear apart, but then I found one with, go figure, a marauder that you had to kill in like 30 or 40 seconds, I'm not sure, I don't remember. It became clear to me almost immediately that this was a horribly designed encounter that would destroy my sanity and be nearly impossible to complete without cheesing or glitching. Exploration and searching for collectibles can be fun, but I found that it came secondary to main objectives, at least for me, especially because of how my experience with secret encounters had soured my impression of their balancing. I really didn't have any faith in them anymore to be fun. For those who want every last scrap of value, there are endgame style missions with changing dynamics, there is a Dark Souls style invasion mode, and there are plenty of secret puzzles and areas to uncover. If you want to get over 100 hours here, it's probably possible to do, but for the basic experience, start to finish, you're looking at around maybe 15 to 20 hours depending on difficulty. Overall, there is a very arcadey feeling to it. The platforming, the repeated instant dashes, the rainbow colors for ammo pickups after chainsaw kills, it's got a very distinct atmosphere. Not all players will enjoy that part, but personally I didn't mind it at all. All weighed against each other, the good was greater than the bad. The fun overpowered the tedium, and when asked whether or not I recommend Doom Eternal, the answer is yes, I do. However, I want to make it clear, this was a review of the single player portion of the game. I fully plan to play the multiplayer mode and see what the game is like from that perspective as well, but I'm not entirely sure if it will be something I produce a dedicated review for. If it feels necessary, I will, but nothing is guaranteed on that front as of right now. Also, worth mentioning, the game does not have predatory monetization, which is a good thing, to be sure, but I'm trying to get away from praising games just because they do something they already should be doing. Not having predatory monetization honestly should be expected. It is supposed to be the norm. We shouldn't have to be grateful when it happens. That's like being grateful your accountant doesn't commit tax fraud. It really is supposed to be normal and expected instead of uncommon. But that's it. I try not to give games a numerical score out of 10 anymore, but if I really had to, I'd say lop a point or two off the mainstream reviewers because for some reason they went cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs on this one. Some people are throwing around 9.5 or 9, and I'm landing on more of an 8. Plus or minus a little bit depending on your history with the franchise and your opinion on the atmosphere and platforming. But yeah, if you want to support, there are links down below. Also, please support Axial GT. He is the one responsible for equipping me with the new PC hardware. And then there's the UEG Patreon, the merch, social media. You get the deal. I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.